Hello, my name is Mark Duffy and I'm an executive coaching psychologist with Kingstown College. And today I'd like to talk to you about inclusive leadership, which is a fascinating and meaningful subject. Did you know that when we meet someone that is dissimilar to us, we release cortisol, which is a stress hormone, because to our brains, similarity equals safety and difference equals a potential threat. Inclusion doesn't come naturally to us, so we need to be intentional about it. And I'm sure we've all heard the term that someone will be a great fit. But when was the last time you heard that they're so different from us, I think they'll be a great fit? That would be an example of intentional inclusion. And intentional inclusion has a myriad of powerful benefits for you, your teams, and your organization, which we will discuss. And what we'll discuss is inclusive leadership and the characteristics of inclusive leaders, the importance of nurturing diversity, building team roles to get an understanding of our strengths and where we might fit in different roles, techniques to increase inclusivity, psychological safety, and coaching questions to create a more inclusive environment. And what is inclusive leadership? It's defined as a leadership style that embraces, encourages, and taps into the creativity and ideas that come about in diverse groups. Now let's talk a bit about the difference between traditional leadership and inclusive leadership. Traditional leaders, they have only one style, so they don't flex their style for different people. And they see their people as high, medium, or low performers. They don't see them in terms of their strengths and what they can offer for different elements of the role. Whereas inclusive leaders, they flex their style for different people and realize that different people prefer different approaches and some circumstances require different styles. And they believe in their people and they get the most out of every person on the team. Let's talk a bit about diversity and the impact of diversity on performance and innovation. The positive relationships between management diversity and innovation and performance are statistically significant. And the presence of managers who are female or from other countries, industries, or organizations can cause an increase in innovation. Fostering a diverse and inclusive culture is a critical success factor as it enables individuals both to shine in their own right and to pull together as a team. And organizations whose leaders welcome diverse talent and include multiple perspectives are likely to emerge from crises even stronger. You'll see from this graph here that diverse work groups outperform homogeneous work groups, although the homogeneous work groups perform better at the very start because trust takes a while to build up. However, that is only true if they're managed well. You'll see the turquoise line for diverse work groups that are not managed well. And here, performance, productivity, and innovation plummets. So overall, the diverse work groups that are well managed perform the best, but they have to be well managed with the activities that we'll talk about today. Now let's talk about the Belbin team roles. This is one example of a psychometric test that assess people's strengths in different areas. According to studies, teams which have strengths across multiple dimensions here perform better than teams with homogeneous groups. And as I go down through each of these roles, have a think about to what extent are each of these areas strong points for you and which members of your team are strong in each of these areas. And as a result, what roles would people be best placed in? Because we don't need fully rounded individuals. What we need is well-rounded teams. None of these strengths are either good or bad. They're just different. And what we need is an understanding of where individual strengths lie and how to manage them as a result. Now, there are 9 team roles overall. And as you see as I go down through them, you don't necessarily have to have taken the test to glean the learning from it. The first 3 are the more people-oriented roles. And the first one I'll speak about is resource investigator. These are extroverted, enthusiastic, and communicative. They explore opportunities and develop contacts with people who can help in the project. Next is the team worker. These are cooperative, mild, perceptive, and diplomatic. They listen, they build, and they avert friction and calm the waters. So these might be good in mediation. And then we have the coordinator. They're mature, they're confident, and a good team leader. They clarify goals and they promote decision-making and they delegate well. The next 3 roles are the more thinking-oriented roles. The plant, because they're grounded, are creative, imaginative, and unorthodox. and they're able to solve difficult problems. Then we have the specialist. They're single-minded, self-starting, and dedicated, and they provide knowledge and skills in rare supply. And the monitor-evaluator are sober, strategic, discerning, and they see and evaluate options and they judge accurately. Then we have the more action or task-oriented roles. The shaper are challenging, dynamic, they thrive under pressure, and they have the drive and courage to overcome obstacles. The implementer, disciplined, reliable, conservative, and efficient. And they turn ideas into practical actions. And the completer finisher, painstaking, conscientious, seeks errors and omissions, and deliver on time. So you can see here that different projects or different even parts of projects might require these different roles. So it's no longer about seeing people as high, medium, or low performers. It's about seeing where they best fit and where we can leverage their strengths to help them to work in roles that they will be most energized by and fulfilled by and more successful in. So now let's talk a bit more about inclusive leaders and the characteristics of inclusive leaders. According to research, there are 6 common characteristics of inclusive leaders. These characteristics are commitment to inclusivity, cognizance of bias, courage, curiosity, cultural intelligence, and collaborative. First, we'll talk about commitment. These leaders are driven by their values of fairness and equality, and they possess a strong sense of personal responsibility for change, and they invest in others, and they inspire others to share their positions, viewpoints, and goals. They make diversity and inclusion a personal priority. And with cognizance of bias, they understand that biases are there, first of all, and that they narrow their field of vision. They identify their own biases and they learn ways to prevent them from influencing decisions. They ask other people for feedback on their own biases because they realize that they're difficult to identify. They seek to implement policies, processes, and structures to prevent biases from stifling diversity and inclusion. And they understand as well that their natural inclination could lead them towards self-cloning or groupthink, because we all probably know about the phenomenon of hiring people that are like us, but not everyone knows about the phenomenon of liking people that are more like us and treating them more favorably and seeing the best in them above others. Now let's talk about just how easy it is for bias to prevail from groupthink, as laid out from the Ash experiments. Have a look at line X on the left. Which line does it most resemble? A, B, or C? The Ash conformity experiments were devised to see how people yielded to groupthink or defied the majority group. And each participant was placed in a room with 7 other people who they believed to be participants but were actors. The 8 people, 1 participant and 7 actors, were shown images like this one and asked the same question that I asked you. In the control group, with no pressure to conform to actors, the error rate on choosing the correct answer was less than 1%. At times, the 7 other actors would answer aloud the incorrect answer before the participant's turn. This was tried out with many different participants, and they found in the actor condition overall, where actors answered incorrectly, 1/3 of all participant responses were incorrect. And overall, 75% of participants gave at least 1 incorrect answer. And you see how obvious the answers are here. And yet, they still were swayed. So it's the equivalent really of me asking you that question and 7 other people saying A or C before you got a chance to answer. And 1/3 of the time, statistically, you would answer incorrectly. I hope this demonstrates just how easy it is for groupthink to prevail. And I imagine this effect would be magnified in the work environment, where there are power imbalances, hierarchical structures, where there's more at stake when you get it wrong or defy someone. And the issues are far more complex and less obvious than this one, so we're far more likely to question ourselves. Also, when people don't speak up, over time, it just becomes the way they operate. So we need to make it safe for people to speak up and offer their opinions and create systems and structures that make it easy to. Now, the next characteristics, courage and humility. Inclusive leaders demonstrate courage in 2 ways. First, they aren't afraid to challenge entrenched organizational attitudes and practices that yield homogeneity. even if their recommendations are politically or culturally unpopular. Nor are they afraid to demonstrate humility by admitting mistakes, acknowledging their personal limitations, and seeking contributions from others to overcome them. Fatalism looks like, hey, I know I have this prejudice, but I am who I am. And in contrast, then leaders who are humble acknowledge their vulnerability to bias and ask for feedback on their blind spots and habits. Some leaders find it difficult to admit that they don't have all the answers and they're not perfect and that they have biases. And in that respect, courage and humility go hand in hand. The next characteristic is curiosity. How many of you have thought halfway through someone's sentence that you know they're wrong and you're just waiting for them to pause so you can just jump in and tell them the right way to think? How many of you have been on the receiving end at one stage? It may seem minor at the time, but all of these add up, and eventually people won't feel safe to talk or feel like there's any point. We have to be intentional about this. Open-mindedness, a passion for learning, and a desire for exposure to different ideas have become leadership traits crucial to success, especially in challenging times. Inclusive leaders seek other perspectives to minimize their own blind spots and improve their decision-making. Inclusive leaders' ability to engage in respectful questioning, actively listening to others, and synthesize a range of ideas makes the people around them feel valued, respected, and represented. They demonstrate a deep curiosity about others, listen without judgment, and seek with empathy to understand those around them. And three powerful words to demonstrate curiosity rather than judgment are, help me understand what drove you to that conclusion. And an inclusive leader is a leader that elicits feedback. An inclusive culture is a feedback culture where we're constantly giving and receiving. Inclusion is like being approachable. If you're the only one that thinks you're approachable, you're in trouble. Other people have to say that I feel comfortable approaching you. And the only way you'll know is by asking. The next characteristic is cultural or social intelligence. They're attentive to others' cultures or preferences and adapt as required. For example, culturally intelligent leaders who are typically extroverted and demonstrative will make an effort to show restraint when doing business with individuals whose cultures value modesty or humility, or individuals whose preferences are for modesty or humility, irrespective of their culture. They regulate the speed and tone of their speech and modify their nonverbal behaviors. So gestures, facial expressions, body language, and physical interactions as situations dictate. In addition to understanding others' cultures, these leaders also demonstrate self-awareness of their own culture, recognizing how it shapes their worldview and how cultural stereotypes can influence their expectations of others. And inclusive leaders are collaborative. They understand that for collaboration to be successful, team members must be willing to share their perspectives. To that end, they create an environment in which all individuals feel empowered to express their opinions freely within the group. They also realize that diversity of thinking is critical to effective collaboration, so they pay close attention to team composition and team processes. For example, they prevent teams from breaking into subgroups, which can weaken relationships and create conflict. They also engender a sense of one team by creating a group identity and shared goals. And on that conflict piece, they don't necessarily see conflict as negative. It's just a difference of opinion, which we can overcome once we have a shared purpose. They ensure team members understand and value each other's diverse knowledge, thinking, and capabilities. Another powerful way of looking at things is to try and collaborate, rather than compete or avoid when there is a difference of opinion or conflict. Look for win-wins, rather than needing to win the argument or avoid the issue. In sum, they empower others, focus on team cohesion, and pay attention to diversity of thinking and psychological safety. What are some of the approaches and techniques that you use to promote inclusion? Let's talk about some now. As leaders, we need to make sure that we're listening to how we're being heard. And we bring out the quiet person, because by doing that one thing, you may help people across multiple dimensions. When you're helping the quiet person to speak up, you're helping everyone to speak up. One way of doing that is to listen to understand rather than listen to respond. That's really powerful. I'm sure we've all been on the receiving end of that at one stage, and it's quite rare. Send information ahead of meetings to allow for pre-processing. A lot of people don't feel comfortable giving their opinions unless they've had a chance to formulate them in advance. After a meeting, talk to the quiet people offline and probe what would help them to speak in the future. Let people know that you plan to call on them in a meeting. And alternate roles such as meeting chair to keep people actively involved. We have to create work environments where we don't require the meeting after the meeting, where people inside are thinking that will never work, or this might work, but don't say it, or I can't believe she said this or that, or he said this or that. We need to be able to be safe to say these things in the meeting in respectful ways. We as inclusive leaders have to create structures that lower the risk for differences and make it easier to offer opinions. And one technique is called the 2-and-2 approach. Before you're about to make a decision on a project, direction, policy, program, approach, pause individually or collectively and ask yourself these questions. 1, what are 2 reasons why people might agree with this decision? 2, what are 2 reasons why people might disagree with this decision? That gives a voice to the people that may agree or disagree with the majority and may not say anything. When you provide the structure, the person that disagrees has the safety to provide their input since it is sought. In order to leverage the diversity of thought, background, talent, we have to be intentional. Now let's talk about the powerful concept called psychological safety. In the late 1990s, medical mistakes at hospitals were a big problem. A prominent researcher investigated to see if better teams made fewer mistakes. And what shocked her was that the most cohesive and better hospital teams make the most mistakes, not fewer. And shocked by her findings, they did some research to see if maybe these teams weren't making more mistakes, maybe they were just more willing and able to talk about them. And since then, there has been a lot of research to demonstrate that this is the case. The better teams have a climate of openness that allows them to report and get to the bottom of mistakes. They actively talk about errors all the time in the process of working together to find new ways of reducing them. And psychological safety makes not just teams, but entire organizations perform better. And the Google study, Project Aristotle, had the goal to find out what distinguishes high-performing teams from low-performing teams. And they included all sorts of things where people went to school, gender mix, everything you would think of in human capital that might predict team performance. And they stumbled into the concept of psychological safety and found it was the #1 most powerful predictor of team performance. And psychological safety is a condition in which human beings feel included, safe to learn, safe to contribute, and safe to challenge the status quo, all without fear of being embarrassed, marginalized, or punished in some way. So it's a belief that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns, or mistakes. And it's about candor. It's about being direct and taking risks and being willing to say I made a mistake and being willing to ask for help. It's not necessarily about just being nice and safe and comfortable. It's about being able to talk about what needs to be spoken about in an open, candid way. And it's not the norm. It's human instinct to want to look good and divert blame and agree with the boss. Hierarchies exaggerate this even more. And by trying to be the type of leader that promotes psychological safety, you can make a big difference. So there's such an opportunity. There is so much latent, untapped talent in the world because people are not making it psychologically safe enough to get that talent and put it to good work. There are many cases where employees for a long time have had great independent thoughts about how to improve things, but just haven't said it. These instances can even be fatal for businesses or even people, like in the case of the Challenger disaster. We need to demonstrate that we believe that failure is not the opposite of success, it is part of success. Trying to be successful and not fail is like trying to go to the gym and get fit without sweating. Failure, mistakes, mishaps will happen, and denying this is denying an opportunity for learning and growth. It's about creating an environment for people to speak up and be honest. And the steps we can take are as follows. It starts with setting the stage, setting the rationale for why their voice might be needed, such as someone could see something I miss or others miss. It starts with being utterly clear and transparent about what we're up against, the complexity and challenges that we face. You need to be proactive with an inviting voice. Ask them, what are they seeing? What concerns do you have? What questions do you have? What's on your mind? Make it more difficult for people to remain silent than to speak up as you've issued those invitations. And it matters how you respond. You must not shoot the messenger. When people come forward with the ideas or bad news, you might take a deep breath and respond in a forward-looking, appreciative manner. So if they come with an issue, thank them for the line of sight and ask them how we can address it. And coaching is a key skill in all of this. Through a coaching style, we can have the confidence to encourage different views and approaches while respecting diverse views. And we can create environments that provide psychological safety. And we can ask these powerful coaching questions of ourselves and of our teams. To what extent do you feel you can bring your real self to work? What is it like being, fill in the blank, for example, a woman, etc., in this organization or team? If you're not one, you won't fully know unless you ask. What is your responsibility for creating an environment where everyone feels like their contribution is valued? How can you help to make this a more inclusive place to work? How can you become more aware of and overcome your biases? What strengths can you bring to this issue? How can we best collaborate together to work towards our collective purpose? What approaches, techniques, systems can we use to ensure all opinions are heard? So to recap, I've spoken about inclusive leadership and the characteristics of inclusive leaders, the importance of nurturing diversity, Belbin team roles, techniques to increase inclusivity, psychological safety, and coaching questions to create a more inclusive environment. Thank you.